The public discourse is a deliberate misdirection. Media fixates on kinetic hardware, increasing defense budgets, concrete fortifications across Europe. They model missile ranges and track tank columns. This is the wrong threat vector. The mathematical certainty is not a loud war, but a sudden and absolute silence. The West's declared strategy is to make the war unbearable for Russia, targeting lethal losses of 50,000 per month. This level of conventional attrition does not invite a symmetric response. It mandates an asymmetric one. The target is not a city. It is the central nervous system of the global financial market, the network of undersea fiber optic cables, and the constellation of satellites that synchronize global transactions. Reports from authorities like RUSI and CSIS have repeatedly warned of this capability. It is a protocol designed to trigger the blind Leviathan, a global economic hegemon that suddenly loses its sight and hearing. All market data, all credit swaps, all liquidity vanishes. This is a kinetic attack on digital infrastructure. The primary vector of this conflict is not kinetic, it is economic. The strategic objective is not to defeat Russia on the battlefield, but to trigger a solvency crisis within the Russian state. As analysts at CSIS have noted, the staggering operational costs and manpower losses are engineered to transform the war into an unsustainable domestic liability for the Kremlin. The explicit stated goal is to make the war unbearable by imposing up to 50,000 lethal losses per month. This is not warfare in a classical sense. It is the application of extreme kinetic cost to force a political entity toward default. It is a solvency crisis, executed with artillery and FPV drones. When a nation-state's capacity for symmetric, conventional response is systematically degraded, it does not surrender. It pivots. Weakness forces a calculated escalation into the asymmetric domain. This is not a choice. It is a mathematical certainty dictated by state survival protocol. This pivot is the pre-calculated outcome. The targets shift from tank columns to financial clearinghouses, from ammunition depots to LNG terminals and subsea data cables. This is the motive: to corner a major conventional power and force it to deploy its asymmetric arsenal against a global financial system that, according to Bank of America, has seen hedging collapse. The escalation isn't the risk, it's the plan. The core of the Western strategy is not military, it is economic. The objective is to impose a kinetic cost so extreme it triggers a solvency crisis within the Russian Federation. The blueprint for this is the deliberate exploitation of asymmetric cost leverage. Analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, frame the equation with terrifying clarity. A $5 million main battle tank can be functionally neutralized by a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a 10-to-1 or 100-to-1 cost disparity. It is a 10,000-to-1 ratio of economic destruction. Every engagement becomes a catastrophic liability for the legacy military asset. This economic inversion is a phenomenon strategists refer to as the democratization of violence. The state's historical monopoly on projecting decisive, kinetic force has been broken by consumer technology. The ability to liquidate a multi-million-dollar asset is no longer gated by a billion-dollar defense program. It is now available at a price point accessible to small, decentralized units operating with near-zero logistical overhead. This transforms the battlefield into a spreadsheet where one side is programmed for exponential financial drain. The strategy is to bleed the adversary's balance sheet, asset by asset. This is not a theoretical exercise. It is stated policy. The explicit goal, as articulated by Ukraine's digital minister, is to make the war unbearable by inflicting 50,000 lethal losses per month. This is not a metric of territory, it is a burn rate. When a state faces a mathematical certainty of conventional defeat through economic attrition, it is forced to change the equation. The kinetic vector shifts from the battlefield to the systemic infrastructure of the forces funding the attrition. The response protocol becomes asymmetric by necessity. This is not a risk, it is a calculation. The analysis of kinetic conflict is a deliberate misdirection. While Western media focuses on European defense budgets and concrete fortifications, the actual theater of operations is not geographical. It is systemic. The Ukrainian objective to inflict unbearable conventional losses is not a strategy to win on the ground. It is a mathematical input designed to force an asymmetric response. This response is the intended trigger. The critical staging areas for this event are not in the primary conflict zone. They are in the global gray zone, designated proxy laboratories for testing systemic fragility. Analysts at RUSI and CSEs have flagged seemingly isolated events, port disruptions in South Africa, infrastructure alerts in Canada, or an energy crisis in Greenland, as controlled stress tests. These are not random regional instabilities, they are calibration exercises. The purpose of these laboratories is to refine the transmission mechanism. Each localized disruption is a test. How efficiently can a kinetic or logistical shock be converted into a financial contagion? This is executed against a global financial system that has, according to Bank of America data, entered a hyperbull state where risk hedging has collapsed. The system has been stripped of its circuit breakers by design. Therefore, the where of this strategy is not a place on a map. The battlefield is the architecture of the global market itself. The gray zone locations are simply the pressure points, the nerve endings, selected to inject the maximum shock into an unprotected financial spinal cord. The regional kinetic war is the pretext. The manufactured systemic fragility is the weapon. The location is an abstraction, designed to trigger a non-abstract global solvency crisis. The doctrine is known as launch on warning. According to analysts at CSIS, it is a protocol designed to ensure a retaliatory strike can be launched upon detection of an incoming nuclear attack, before that attack lands and decapitates the chain of command. It is a game theory solution to a first strike scenario. The stated Western strategy to inflict unbearable conventional losses on Russia, aiming for 50,000 casualties per month, directly increases the adversary's reliance on their nuclear deterrent, making this protocol a critical point of systemic failure. This reliance creates a new attack vector, the fog of digital war. A sophisticated cyber attack does not need to detonate a warhead. It only needs to blind the early warning systems, the network of satellites and ground-based radar that confirms an attack is underway. For the commander in the bunker, the screens going black presents a binary choice with an impossible deadline. Is it a system error, or is it the prelude to a decapitation strike? The flight time of an ICBM allows approximately 15 minutes for this decision. Fear becomes a tactical weapon. The doctrine forces the commander to assume the worst-case scenario. To hesitate is to risk losing the ability to retaliate at all. Therefore, the kinetic cost being imposed by conventional warfare creates a mathematical certainty that the adversary will leverage this digital vulnerability, forcing a launch decision based on fear, not data. The trigger is no longer the missile, it is the loss of signal. The stated policy of inflicting unbearable kinetic costs, 50,000 lethal losses per month, is not a strategy. It is a mathematical trigger for asymmetric escalation. While Europe prepares for conventional conflict, building fortifications and seizing assets, the actual vector of attack has already shifted. The systemic liability is not the battlefield. It is the unhedged financial system, where, according to a Bank of America survey, risk hedging has collapsed as investors hit hyperbull. This engineered fragility is the intended transmission mechanism. The calibration forecast for the next 12 months is therefore not military. It is an attribution impossible economic event. A simultaneous 72-hour blackout of a top 5 European container port and its co-located financial data clearing hub. The official report, citing CSIS threat models, will blame a cascading system failure. The actual signal will be a successful test of a launch-on warning protocol against the core of Western solvency.